And so it is all about the ability to subtly perceive the being that you are in truth. There is nothing in the external that can help you in any way, can give all of your power to what you think is most powerful, and it will not help you. You are absolutely, completely and utterly responsible for your own evolution. Because the only way to know yourself is to be yourself. To meet yourself in the subtle perception of being. Nothing in the external has any benefit. If you meet a being where you can perceive the being, then stay close, because it will help you to perceive your own being and to deepen into your own being. But it is never about the form. It is never about the external. It is only ever about the subtle perception of the being. Your spiritual life only begins when you recognize the being. Every moment before that is just purification in preparation for recognition of the being. To recognize the being is to restore the original connection with who you truly are. You are not becoming something you are not. You are restoring the connection. Some call this awakening, but you are restoring, remembering, subtly perceiving the being that you have always been. When there is a subtle perception of the being, you start to recognize that nothing external has any validity. The more that you truly perceive the being that you are, you know it is the way and the path, and the only way is illuminated by the being that you are. You are pulled to keep the company of other beings that are resting in the being, because it illuminates and enlivens the possibility of the depth of remembering. It helps you perceive the depth and the truth of who you are. But only when you perceive the being that you are does spiritual life truly begin. It is a journey into yourself to discover what you are, what you have always been, and how you are creating your own delusion. That out of your greatness, you are creating your smallness, and it is your choice. You can keep perpetuating and living in the illusion of your smallness, or you can recognize your greatness and dissolve your smallness back into the remembering of your greatness. But it is only through the being, the subtle perception, that you have any possibility of recognizing how this is working. There is a natural evolution in consciousness. It is not an evolution in consciousness that is happening in the external or in the world. The natural evolution of consciousness is happening, guess where? In consciousness itself, in the being itself. So it is only when you are able to subtly perceive the being, the consciousness that you are, that you can start to make a difference, that you can start to evolve in your consciousness by dissolving the illusion. You start dissolving your own limitations. And this is why we speak of it being your own responsibility to dissolve your limitations. No one can do that for you. No one can do that for you. This happens through resting in the being and having the courage, the humility, the willingness, and the maturity to dissolve your own limitations by being able to perceive what you are in truth and to illuminate and shine that light of awareness of your true nature upon your own limitations, to shine that light upon what you have created and believed to be true. So, my friends, it is not about dabbling in the mind and the constant story of delusion. We could say that the benefit of the delusion is that it will drive you crazy. And at some point, you will be forced to ask, pray, beg, be on your knees to fall into the truth of who you are and start to dissolve. As we start to dissolve, we start to burn in the holy fire. We start to purge. When we start to purge and we start to burn, we could say that our own consciousness is creating situations, ripe and perfect situations, to allow us to see through our own delusion. It's creating the perfect situations to reveal to us where we are deluded, where our own consciousness is corrupt, is distorted, is limited. Because until we see our own limitations, we are not able to shine the light upon them. So the benefit of being lost is purely to shine the light. But we can only dissolve the delusion, can only dissolve our limitations when we are resting in the being. If we are trying to dissolve our limitations through the faculty of the mind, we will just create more suffering. We will just be more stressed. We have to come to the being. We have to recognize this subtle perception of the being in order to be able to refine and have a clear perspective. We need the clear perspective, clear vision to be able to see through the delusion. We are living in a time of distorted delusion, the collective. It is a great big tangle of ignorance. And every one of us has certain kinds of threads involved in that, more or less. The whole play of the world is attempting to sell us more of that, is attempting to tangle us in. So we have to come to the innermost being so that we untangle the karmic obscurations. We untangle ourselves from it and we come to know who we truly are, what we are in truth, and then we do not buy in anymore to what is playing out in the collective. We live in utter freedom. We live with absolutely no effect from the collective. But of course, we recognize that if we are affected by the collective, it's because we are tangled into it. What grace when we can see this and not just be so immersed in it that we are deluded by it. What grace when we have the ability to shine the light upon it so that we can untangle ourselves and dissolve the threads that create the delusion, our own delusion. We create it ourselves, we dissolve it ourselves. We come to refine and know the unified being that we are through recognizing how we create and how we have the power within our own innermost being, our own intelligence, to dissolve our own creation back into the wholeness of who we truly are. But be sure of one thing, you cannot do this alone. Because if you try to do it alone, you will try to use the mind and you will find yourself in further and further frustration. It's your responsibility to rest in the being. But until you are deeply, deeply established in the being, you will find that you need support. And so then it is to discern, what is that support? What supports you to rest deeper in the being? What points you to that truth? What illuminates corruption and delusion? What allows and supports you to rest more deeply in the being? And say yes to that, and no to that which pulls you into distraction and delusion. The collective is a tangled web, but we have the possibility of living completely untangled from it, where we are living deeply, resting in the being. We have the capacity within the being to dissolve all of our karmic attachments. And we do this through resting in the being, meeting the flow of life, the grace of life, and having the courage, humility, and willingness to see our own delusions, to see where we are moving from mind, to see where we are creating separation, see where we are in denial, see where the karmic obscurations are playing out, where dynamics are playing out to attempt to keep pulling us in, to keep pulling us in. But what great glory that we have the absolute power and capacity within the innermost being to refine ourselves back into, let's say, into the being, into the knowing, and into the intelligence. But we only come into this intelligence through the subtle perception of the being. You have to be able to subtly perceive what we are in truth. We are fully equipped. We are fully equipped. And the way is in the being. The way is in the subtle perception of the being, in the knowing, the alive presence of the knowing. There is no other way. Of course, the mind will not believe this, but we are not really concerned with what the mind believes and what it thinks. It is time to let go. It is to have the courage to see how we are deluding ourselves, can give the guidance again and again and again. Rest in the being, observe the character, observe the ways that you are creating your own delusion, observe the ways you are creating your own suffering, observe the ways that you are addicted to being pulled into the same story again and again and again, and repeating the karmic dynamics and patternings. These are the discordant patternings of consciousness. And as the pure consciousness, as the being, we have the ability to shine the light upon the discordant patterns within our own functioning by meeting all of our own functioning in our purity, in our wholeness, in our innocence as the light. And dissolve it, to dissolve it all. What we can be sure of is that if we are saying yes to delusion, if we are saying yes to a situation, and through our karmic obscurations, we are desperately fighting to try to get something that is being divinely taken away from us, that we have to see that there is grace. There is grace at play that is removing everything that will distract us, everything that is attempting to create repeating dynamics and hold us captive in our discordant, delusional ideas. Remember, we are in a time where there is so much hidden, so much corruption. We can see it playing on the surface of life, but we have to recognize we can either buy into that and be a part of it, or we can live in utter freedom. When we come to live in utter freedom, we pull our attention away from being entangled in the collective, and we actually start living in a completely different dimension, which is reality. We start living in a completely different dimension. If you do not have the subtle perception, you cannot tell who is living in another dimension and who is not. You will see everything as you are, not as it is. You will see everything through the filters. If you imagine yourself to be a separate individual, you will see every being as a separate individual, and you will project that upon them. But there are beings that are not living in the same kind of delusion. There are beings that are not bound by the collective consciousness. There are beings that live in utter freedom, that do not live in fear. There are beings that are not attached to the stories, and yet they may play characters for you, but they are utterly free. And until you can subtly perceive your own innermost being, you will not access the intelligence, the wisdom to see what is what and what is really going on. Everything is colluding, conspiring in a flow of grace out of the most profound and innocent love to set you free. And this is why we speak of not projecting outwards to anyone else, to not project outwards, because it is your internal work. What you see as your projected reality is created by your mind. It's created by the distortions in consciousness. It's created through filters. Remember, you do not see things as they are, you see things as you are. At times we will be carried in the fog, the Maya, and there is grace in that. And the grace of it is, it will bring us to meet our own distortions, our own corruptions, our own delusions, in order to be free. So will we receive the grace of seeing more clearly? Will we receive the initiations we are pulled through? Will we have the courage to not continue to project and get bound by story? Will we have the courage to rest in the being and observe our behaviors and dissolve our own delusions, we are required to subtly perceive the being, and we need the power of transcendence. We have to be able to completely transcend in order to know that we are the transcendent field in truth. We have to expand our own limited consciousness to know its cosmic nature, its universal nature. And this happens when consciousness recognizes itself in consciousness. It is not an experience in time. It is the recognition of your timeless divine being that is whole. And here we can perceive the path inward. We can discover the illuminated light of our own radiant self. And here we have the innate power within us to now start the deep inner work. This is true yoga. Yoga has nothing to do with standing on your head. The true yoga, the true yoga is the sadhana of dissolving the illusion in your innermost sanctuary of being. This is the way of the heart. This is the way of perfection. It is the way to know the divine wholeness that you already are. And it is already here. It is about seeing through the veils that you are creating in every moment that you believe, that you attach to ideas and concepts, and that you hold your learned knowledge as precious. We have to come to the subtle perception of the being in order to access the true intelligence and to rest absorbed. Absorption. It's all about absorption. It's all about immersion, right? So now we start to understand after all these years what immersion truly is. Immersion, my friends, is to rest immersed in your innermost being. To rest immersed in the innermost being. Rest absorbed in the stillness, in the silence of who you truly are. To rest absorbed, recognizing that who you are is the transcendent field, that your consciousness is not limited, that your consciousness is cosmic, universal, and unbounded. That who you are in truth is an unbounded field of pure awareness. We could say that as awareness is aware of itself, that awareness is consciousness, right? When awareness is aware of itself, it creates a kind of aliveness that is consciousness. That consciousness of awareness aware of itself is completely pure. But that consciousness has learned to identify with its own patterns. That consciousness has learned to attach and identify with its own patterns and has come to misunderstand its true nature. So consciousness, when it identifies with the patterns of consciousness, it is distorted. It is holding itself in ideas and concepts and beliefs and memory. It's holding itself. And when it holds itself in patterns, it suffers. It believes its own ideas. It creates fears out of its own beliefs and ideas. It gets stuck in memory, it gets stuck remembering the past, imagining the future, and it gets tangled in a web of itself. It identifies at the point of the body and the mind, and it starts to believe that this is what I am. This is what I am. but it has never been true. The essence of consciousness is utterly pure. Follow your own purity, right? Dance in your own purity. Follow your own purity. Follow your own innocence. But you can only find it in the innermost being and the subtle, subtle perception. So as these words come, it is about the resonance. The resonance is the aliveness of the knowing. The resonance is the refined frequency of the being that is alive and fresh, knowing itself in this moment. When a being is resting in that knowing, the depth of that resting, the depth of that absorption, the depth of that knowing, it emits a transmission. It carries a frequency, and that frequency is the resonance. So where you recognize the resonance, you are recognizing your own resonance, your own frequency of knowing. As you recognize this resonance of knowing, you recognize that it is not a mental understanding. It has this aliveness that pulls itself into itself. It is absolutely fascinated and drawn to itself. You can know that you are starting to mature because you will feel that pull get stronger and stronger. It will become stronger and stronger than the pull of the mind to continue to indulge in distraction. As you start to mature, the one-pointedness and the pull of that resonance, it will pull you to be with beings. It will pull you to be in the companionship of beings that are holding that resonance. Because the longing to know more of that resonance of your own nature starts to really come alive. The light starts to be recognized as being inside you. But when you're not fully recognizing that light inside you, you can imagine that it is outside of you. That's where we can start to believe that it's another form. But essentially the meeting is in the resonance. It's in the pure essential being. This is where the subtlety and the maturity is so important, because if we do not have the subtlety, we will be pulled to forms. We will be pulled by frequencies that are not always pure. But the grace is that at some point we get to see through that. We will be pulled by the reflection of our own distortions in initiation. We will be fooled, we could say, by our own distortions. That is why we do not want to attach the attention anywhere external. And we do not want to project our own purity to an external form, right? Imagine that it's outside of us. We want to recognize, right? It's so alluring. It's so alluring to the me to be trapped in the story of unworthiness and to project that our purity, our beauty, our celestial nature, our wholeness, our innocence, Our beauty is somewhere outside of us. It never is. And yet, what an incredible celebration when we can meet in that purity, when we can meet in the beauty, where we can meet in the love, where we can meet where there are no projections and no needs and no attachments. There is just the shining light of the glory, and we meet absorbed in being. And what a celebration it is, and how deeply pulled we are to be in that celebration. What incredible grace. We will fool ourselves until we rest in the being and we use our true insight, our true intelligence to see our delusions and recognize that we have the power, the capacity to dissolve them. So it's very good news. It just doesn't happen overnight. But more good news. We are eternal beings. We could say, so we have forever. And yet, the body is limited. The body is finite. So we do want to make the most of it. And we do want to take the most extraordinary care of it. If we do not take care of the body vehicle, we will be impeded in our depth of inquiry and subtle perception that will be available to us, because the stresses of the body will start to distract us. Incapacity of the physicality will start to distract us. So we want to take care of the physicality, and we are given all the instructions that we require. Simple, wholesome food, good sleep, moving the body to move the energy. Understanding that when we are stressed, the breath is affected by stress. And when the breath is restricted and contracted with the distortions of our consciousness, we are too restricting the flow of life. Pranayama helps us to purify and prepares us, helps us to purify and prepares us, supports us to be able to be still. It supports us to be able to rest absorbed in the being. In and of itself, does not bring us to subtle perception, but it prepares us and supports us. What we start to notice as the deeper that we rest absorbed, the more fine and subtle is the breath, almost as if we are not breathing. Because we have stopped like being entangled and engaged in the worldly, right? afraid of this, stress, anxiety, right? All of this going on, holding our breath, right? All of the ways that we are wasting the preciousness, the breath of life. Pranayama offers us the possibility of subtly and carefully, gently refining that. Supporting us to come to stillness, supporting us to rest. The deeper that we can rest, the more ability we have to witness, to watch the movements of the mind, the habits, the conditioning. We have more ability to watch our reactions. We have the ability to start to see that our reactions are some kind of protection and resistance to the flow of life. We have the ability, instead of reacting and projecting that reaction outwards, we have the ability to meet the energy underneath reaction in our nervous system and dissolve it into the being. Right? This is the grace. And as we dissolve our habitual move to project and react and distract, as we dissolve our natural conditioned ways of numbing and protecting through resting and observing, still, feeling the feelings, recognizing the stress in the nervous system, instead of the mind consciousness moving to story, moving to projection, moving to defend, moving to keep perpetuating the cycle. I usually do it with this hand. This is the cycle, right? The cycle of karma, misery, chasing pain, chasing pleasure, trying to avoid pain. But actually, in truth, subtle intelligence there, we are chasing pain because we're addicted to pain. We're addicted to suffering. The pain body, what does the pain body feast on? It feasts on pain. It's nourished, it's addicted to suffering and struggle and the story and finding ways to keep the suffering alive. So when we are resting in the being, when we are able to be still, when we stop those fluctuations of the mind through the subtle practices, and these practices, they can be of any tradition, right? Often what is being referred to might be more of the yoga sadhana, but they can be of any tradition. It's the simple gifts that we have been given in the universal teachings that allow us to come to stillness, that allow us to come to rest in the stillness of the being. And then we require a certain grace to point us to the being. We require the grace of a presence that can point us and say, this resonance is important, right? Because otherwise we overlook it and we overlook it. When we are ready, we will create the guidance that is needed, right? We create everything that is needed. But essentially, in the self, in the grace of our true nature, we are pure power and we are creating everything. Of course, that self, that being, that grace is one. That too is the Satguru, right? The Satguru is the guidance that comes alive inside the innermost being. And the deeper that we know the innermost being, we start to recognize the intelligence of the self that we are, and we are self-guiding. The Satguru is your highest self, the knowing of yourself, the purest wisdom inside. And the deeper that we're falling into this incredible, pure knowledge. It's a complete knowledge. But we have to let go of everything that the mind thinks it knows. We have to let go and come to the emptiness. Recognize that when we are being emptied, when we are burning, we are being purified. The mind doesn't like it, but it is the most extraordinary grace to be carried into the fire, the hot fire, the burning fire of Shakti. Of course, the mind doesn't like it, because the mind, it's not that it even wants to keep itself alive, it just doesn't know any other way. But the mind is consciousness too. And the mind consciousness is a small dance. It's a habituated pattern that's just running in the same loop. When we come to the being and we recognize the being, this resonance, when you recognize the being that is untouched, that is unbounded, every time there is a glimpse, every time there is a taste, we come closer. And yes, at some point we fall into a depth where the perspective shifts. We could say that is the true restoration of the deep connection. We cannot be fooled by the illusion of separation anymore, but refinement only starts in this moment. And the refinement is the remembering of the unified field, the Atman. And as we refine and refine and refine, really what is happening is we are resting more and more absorbed. The mind creates ideas when it hears about cosmic consciousness, unity consciousness, Brahman, Para-Brahman. And the mind says, yes, I want that, that's the ladder I want to climb, right? And of course, in the deep rootedness of the resonance of being, there's a recognition. Of course, that recognition wants to fall all the way into the deepest possible absorption of its own wholeness, to know its absolute wholeness, the supreme reality. But if we get deluded by labels and we get deluded by the mind and ideas of what these words mean, they will act as barriers. Really, all we are referring to with these words is the depth of absorption in the being. Are you absorbed in the first layer of opening? As you refine and refine by meeting life, refining through feeling the feelings, becoming more and more absorbed in the being. So this is not something you can fake, not something that you can push. It's only through deeper and deeper absorption in the being that we fall then into, let's say, recognition of being the unified field, and then a deeper absorption happens, a deeper absorption that is like a purity, remembering of a depth of purity, which is before the entanglement in consciousness. When we fall into this, we fall into a depth of absorption that can be called Brahman, when we fall into this depth of absorption, our depth of absorption, in a way, our karmic ties are cut. And we're no longer living on a single dimension of the false reality. We're living in a depth of reality where we are free, right? But it's only through absorption in the being. You can read a gazillion books and try to mentally understand it, can try to do all kinds of practices, but no practices even will help. It's about the depth of absorption in the being. And the depth of absorption in the being, yes, it's about sitting in absorption, but it's also living absorption. You can't get to that depth of absorption without purifying and integrating all of life and everything that life is offering. Because the whole point is that you are the unified field. So if you're separating yourself from anything, that's going to act as a barrier, right? You have to be absorbed in everything, even the things that you don't like. You have to find the universal essence through surrender in absolutely everything. You have to meet the greatest challenge, everything that your mind says, I do not like this, I do not want this. If you can recognize, I created this, what a miracle, I'm grateful for this, I won't react to it, I'll rest absorbed, I won't make projections, I will move from the depth of being and allow whatever wants to happen on the surface of life to happen, and yet I will keep meeting and dissolving my own distortions until I have seen all the way through this. This is how we refine it all the way into being, right? Sometimes we've spoken about feasting on our own distortions, like chewing it all up, right? We're feasting on it. Consuming it all. And as we do, we recognize the essence nature of that which we didn't want on the surface of life is actually the same bliss that is our true nature. Now let's just mention something about bliss. Bliss is not a mood or an emotion. It's not something that comes and goes. Something that comes and glows. It does glow. It glows inside the innermost being. What is bliss? Bliss, true bliss, it's the bliss of being yourself. It's the felt sense of being empty, the felt sense of knowing. It's the moment of gorgeousness, clarity, shining luminosity, right? Even if it's a nanosecond, it's so beautiful, right? Bliss. We imagine that bliss comes and goes because we fall into the gorgeousness of bliss, and then we go back to the mind. And then we cycle in the mind, we fall into bliss, and then we come back to the mind. And so we imagine that bliss comes and goes, but bliss is the constant. Bliss is the bliss of being. Bliss is contentment. Bliss is let's say it's resting, absorbed in the emptiness, equanimity, balance, harmony, resting in the sanctuary, being unmoved and unshaken. It's not to say that distorted patterns don't come in and sensations and feelings don't come in. As we're refining, there are depths of refinement that happen after we come into deeper layers of absorption as well, right? Where there's always refinement happening. So let's not create any new concepts about what this is about. And you know, this is why we have to embody this and only move from the embodied, living, alive intelligence of our true nature, right? This is the transmission, the emanation. This is the aliveness. This is where you recognize the resonance of true nature, right? So as these words are coming, you're not understanding with the mind. Where it lands is because there's a resonance, and your own intelligence, the field of intelligence, is enlivened and illuminated. It's recognition. The mind can go so far in understanding because the mind too is consciousness, but the mind consciousness is dense and limited in its capacity, whereas the subtle perception of being, the subtle perception of who we are in truth, is this pure intelligence. And here there is bliss, true bliss, simple bliss. Here there is purity. Here there is natural innocence. There is the immaculate, the unbounded, immeasurable, unfathomable. There is perfection, wholeness. There is no sense of want or lack or something missing here, right? So we recognize that when we fall into the shining glory of the being, we can recognize some resonance of what is being spoken here. Maybe not the whole of what is being spoken, but do not create concepts that want to try to look for that or try to cultivate it. Cultivating it is the mind's idea of creating a spiritual mood. Fall into the being and discover that it's already here, right? So right now, the resonance that's alive in you, where there's recognition, where you feel the aliveness, where you feel the pull deeper into yourself, where you feel the timeless presence of this moment. It's your timeless presence. This is the being that you are. This is where you are subtly perceiving the being. It's a resonance of recognition. And it is the only way to fall deeper into yourself. So the guidance can come. Rest here. Rest in your own presence. Recognize the being that is unmoving. And then observe your functioning. Watch. Rest in the stillness and watch. And as you watch, you are aware, as you are aware of the movements, the distortions, the resistances, the patterns, the habits, you are illuminating them. And as you illuminate them, do not move towards the stories about them. We could say sometimes the naturalness of the story to elaborate. One, it will create a hook, but also it can sometimes pull forward a deeper purging. It can pull forward a deeper, right? Something really like this, like really pulling it right up. Right. Something that's got really, really stuck in there, right? So sometimes we have to go into like our own kind of craziness. We have to go into our own cycling. We have to fall into what feels like despair. We have to fall into what feels like being humbled so that we can really, oh, here's the word, dredge it up, right? Dredge up some of that really deeply settled old matter right? Those karmic obscurations. So then we start to recognize that when we're going through something really challenging that really brings us to our knees, where we're burning in the holy fire, where we feel like, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. It's over. I cannot, not going to take another breath. Will I wake up in the morning, right? That place at the bottom of the barrel. It's grace. Oh God, it's grace. Oh God, it is grace to be at the bottom of the barrel. And what you find is that you think you got to the bottom of the barrel, but my goodness, you're carried deeper. There's a sub-basement. Kali Ma has a multitude of sub-basements that if you're really, really ready for this, you're really saying yes to grace, she will carry you deeper and deeper into her sub-basements, right? To really purge up the good stuff, right? You see, the mind says something is wrong here, something is wrong here. This is not okay. This I cannot handle. But when we get to the edge of feeling that we cannot handle it and we're burning, it's to show us who we truly are, right? It's to purify out of the delusion. And in this time, it takes to take us right to the edge of what can feel like insanity and what I cannot bear, right? But what the me says and the mind says and the contracted heart says, I cannot bear this. I cannot bear this. The infinite heart says, yes, you can. Yes, you can. Take another breath. Make it really deep. Come to stillness. Recognize that in truth, you as the being are not touched. Recognize you are the light of awareness that is shining upon the happening. You are the self, and you are creating this story in yourself to reveal where you are restricted. You are creating this small self, this character. You are creating it so that you can see your blind spots and free yourself. This is the illuminated perspective. You are the self that is creating a small self in you. You are creating the world in you so that you can free yourself. If there is a practice, it is the practice of refinement. It is the practice of resting absorbed and refining everything that feels to be separate and disparate and fragmented. It's refining it into the being. Every being will go as far as they are able to go. But if you are here now, you have the capacity. When beings fall away, it's usually because there are some kind of holding patterns that are so deep that will not let go, that they are committed to holding on. And that is perfect. Every being will find their way. Every being will find what is needed to go as deep as possible in this lifetime. But there is this incredible grace. It is to recognize the subtlety of being. That being recognizing itself, the subtlety, the subtle perception that is before sense perception, that is before everything. It is to recognize that you are that being. And as the being recognizes itself, and you can feel the subtle knowing of this resonance of truth, then the way is illuminated within. It does not mean that immediately the absorption will happen and the one-pointedness will happen. But at some point it will. It is also to recognize that the play of life continues, because this is how refinement happens. Nothing is outside of wholeness. But when we have the graced perspective, we recognize that what we are in truth is the one being, the one self, divine wholeness. And we are creating, let's say, a projected seeming reality that is not the divine reality. It's not the pure reality. The projected reality is the world, right? It's the world as we see it. But that world is happening in you. You're having a unique experience in there, right? And you're pulling in through your own consciousness, you're pulling in and you're overlaying every single character, you're overlaying. You're imagining what they are. This one's good, this one's bad, this one I like, this one I don't like. It's all yourself. You're creating those filters. So in the innermost being, we have the possibility of dissolving all of those filters. So we're not projecting onto any other being. We're only ever seeing ourselves. We're only ever seeing the shining light. And we're only ever meeting in love. We're not attached to a story about someone. Oh, they are this, they're good, they're bad. They did this, they did that. It becomes completely irrelevant. But it becomes irrelevant once we have dissolved the stories. We can't fake that part. If we try to, we'll get caught out by our reactions, right? That's where there can be beings that are resting in depths of absorption, of knowing the clarity, but they will reveal themselves by the ways that they behave, right? And of course, it's all the one. Nothing is out of place. All we are ever doing is cheering each other on, let's say, on the surface of life. We're cheering each other on. Go on, see through it, do the work. Stop projecting, fall deeper in, rest absorbed. And then the celebration when we meet. Yeah, here, right? Celebration when we meet here, where the light is just shining and shining and shining. when we rest absorbed and we start to live in deeper dimensions, right? We could call these lokas, if we like the Vedas, right? We start living in deeper, more profound dimensions of pure reality. Call this Sat Loka, right? So we start living where we're not touched, but we can still see the collective playing, and we still move, right? We still look exactly the same, but not touched. But we also don't want to give the idea that there is not still an evolution happening. Of course there is. Of course that evolution continues. It's just, it's not happening in the body anymore, right? It's happening in the deeper realms, right? So it's like we die before we die. We die before the body dies. But that dying is a dying into reality, right? The illusion dies, separation dies, but we open and we go deeper and deeper in. We rest more and more deeply absorbed in the being until we enter into the divine dimensions, right? But we're still access all areas, right? So as these words are coming, feel the resonance of recognition. Feel the aliveness. Feel the enlivened field, the stillness, the silence, the aliveness of the presence. What we are presenting here is a vaster picture of the divine reality in order to give a taste. Where you feel the resonance, you start to taste where you already are. And it gives the possibility of enlivening a pull, a magnetic pull, a draw out of the layers of delusion and corruption, out of the addiction to the story and the suffering, to recognize on some level that there is so much more than is currently being lived in. And yet we all still have a service in this current dimension. But our deepest service is to not be in collaboration with the distorted, corrupt collective, to not be in collaboration with ignorance and separation. When we are in collaboration with the being, we are living free of karma. We're living free of that collective, and yet we are aware of that. So our work is to untangle, through untangling our own karmas, untangle our collaboration with the collective, through seeing through where we are entangled and deluded, and not coming to any story of, oh God, that's terrible, I'm so bad, right? That's just a waste of time. Every being has threads entangled. We have to, as long as we have these bodies. There is a point where our bodies too, we can become completely unentangled, but we don't really need to go there right now. But in order for this, we have to refine our bodies, right? We have to take care of the body and refine the body. We're given everything in order to refine every layer. There's so much beauty, and it's all laid out. Right now, it is to feel the resonance. When you feel the resonance, you are not hearing the words. You are receiving the grace of where the words are coming from and allowing them to carry you into your own recognition, your own subtle perception of the being. It is this constant invitation into the being, into the subtlety, where you can perceive the true essence nature that is completely natural and simple. It's a equanimity, a harmony. It's balance, right? It's not a mood or an idea. It's so natural and whole and pure. And it is here to follow your own purity, to rest and recognize more and more deeply that which is not touched by anything, to recognize your own purity, your own innocence, who you have always been before the great misunderstanding, and recognize here in this deeper perspective that you yourself created and are creating the misunderstanding. And you yourself, in the subtle perception of being, the subtle perception of who you truly are, have the possibility of dissolving all of the threads of this misunderstanding. So where you feel the aliveness, where you feel the pull, where you feel the yes, where you feel the yes, sign me up, carry me in, take me all the way, I'm yours, let's go, let's do this, boom, where you feel that, that's the resonance. That's the aliveness that says yes, 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 yes. This is where we are heading. This is Purna. We're not there yet on the surface of life, but this is what is in process. This is the constant invitation. And this is why the constant invitation is to point to what is true, an invitation to keep again and again and again meeting the subtlety of your being, and to keep observing, watching the moving, changing, and dissolving through feeling the feelings and refining We have not even begun. You do not journey with me in the external, although it may look like that in the appearance of life. You journey with me where you can subtly perceive the being. Where we journey together is in the innermost being. It is a divine orchestration. And when you are ready, I am here. You will find me inside, in the innermost being. Will not meet you in the play of the world, in the ways that the mind and the me wants. I will only meet you in the inner dimensions of the being, where the real work happens. Of course, it looks like the meeting on the surface of life, and the meeting on the surface of life is incredibly beautiful, a beautiful companionship, let's say. What is meant by that is that the meeting is not in the mind, it's not in the story, it's not in the happenings, it's not in the projections. There's no interest in that because it's not real. When we free ourselves from the karmic dynamics, we no longer feed those dynamics. When we don't feed those dynamics, the mind doesn't like it because it wants to perpetuate the dynamics. It's looking to repeat that dynamic, right? It's looking for relationships that repeat the dynamic. It's looking for relationships that will repeat the dynamics of the early life. It's looking for relationships that will confirm the story of not enough, of lack. It's looking for those dynamics. Yes, it sounds crazy, and it is, but it's looking for those dynamics. But it's looking for those dynamics, and that's where we have a choice to either repeat it by moving through the delusion and distortions again and again and again, or we have the possibility of seeing what is happening, shining the light, not projecting, meeting the feelings and moving through the play as it's unfolding. As insight comes and we get to go deeper and deeper into these hidden places that are trying to surface. We get to go deeper and deeper. And in that, refine all of these threads and layers so that we complete the karmic obscurations. We complete that karma so it doesn't keep us bound, right? We're completing and disentangling ourselves from the collective as we complete those karmic plays, right? But of course, if we stop playing that role for someone and they're looking for us to play that role, when we just stop playing out that dynamic, they don't like it. We don't like it. right? Any being that's looking to perpetuate the play of karma doesn't like it when the let's say the needs are not met in the cycle of misery, right? But there's so much grace if we can see how this works and see through it. So lots of words, lots of flow, expressing how all of this is working. What is this? It's the flow of the Veda, it's the reverberations of the Veda, it's the flow of intelligence. The words do not matter. It's not about understanding. It's not about getting a recording and taking notes. Absolute waste of time. It is about receiving it in the being, receiving the reverberation, receiving the resonance, and allowing where there's a yes, where there's an aha, where there's a deeper landing, where there's an aliveness. Stay right here, because this is the being perceiving itself in the subtlety of consciousness, right? It's consciousness recognizing its purity. Follow the purity. Let your own purity of being guide you deeper and deeper. So this connection in the innermost being with yourself can find that aliveness of the Satguru inside. It is yourself. Can find that too in the connection, for example, that you find a pull to a sage or a saint or the holy mountain, Arunachala, or to the Ganga, or any other holy place, right? Where you feel this deep resonance. I mean, it can be to just, it's not just an incredibly profound tree or the ocean. It doesn't matter where it is. It doesn't have to be in India, for example, right? It can be anywhere. But often there are these power places, in a way, enlightened environments, right? The presence of perfection is right here on the surface of life, right? So you feel the resonance and you're pulled to that. But that recognition is the recognition, it's the subtle perception of your innermost being. So again, we tend to project it instead of recognizing that what you're recognizing is yourself. So come to the subtle perception of yourself, and you recognize that the holiness is everywhere. The holiness is inside you, right? Again, if we read a certain scripture or text, it brings alive a resonance. If we try to understand it mentally and study it mentally, we get carried away in the mind. But if we receive the resonance and we recognize that the resonance is inside, it's the innermost being perceiving itself. It's the recognition of the light, right? These are all the ways. And let's say the frequency, the resonance might feel subtly different, right? Different flavors of resonance, right? But essentially it's all yourself, and you're entering in this resonance. You're opening to the field of bliss, and you're opening to like the celestial fineness of your own celestial nature, your own bliss body. So it's to recognize that there are these incredible ways that we are invited. Our habit to project it outwards is just so immediate in these times. But this invitation to keep recognizing it inside, recognizing it inside, recognizing it inside, you see? And so then we're journeying together. This is the caravan that we spoke of, right? We're journeying together into the incredible depths of divine reality, into God, into Mother, whatever we want to call this, into the depths of the self, into the depths. And here it starts to make sense. What is that power at the holy mountain? What is that that happens when you dip in the Ganga? Right? What is that? What is that when you're sitting beside an old ancient tree? What is that resonance? What is that? You start to recognize, because you're able to perceive the subtlety in your own being, right? So as these words come, you will feel a certain recognition of what is being spoken. The mind can say, oh, well, I don't really know that yet, right? Because the mind is so ready to discard and put itself down. Yes, you may not be absorbed all the way, but find out where you are absorbed and recognize that it's only resting absorbed, immersed in the being, that you are carried deeper. Because when you are resting absorbed, you are drinking the nectar of the being. And this is what carries you into a deeper and deeper absorption. Rest absorbed at times, of course, with the eyes closed, but also rest absorbed with the eyes open. This is where the magic happens. Resting absorbed with the eyes open. You're in the world, but not of it. Mm. It's not about trying to hold your eyes open for as long as possible, right? All of these mental ideas. When you're resting absorbed, the absorption isn't anything to do with the physical layer. The absorption is the absorption into the being. And the deeper that you're resting absorbed, you come out of the physical, you come out of the emotional, come out of the mental, right? You're resting absorbed deeper and deeper. Come to rest in the being. When the focus of attention is the being, resting in the being, the movement of the mind starts to naturally slow because it's not being fed by thinking, and the attention zoomed and focused, right? So you're just resting, absorbed in the being. The body will continue to do what it does, continue to look around, continues to blink. The breath will definitely slow, become very, very subtle the deeper the absorption in the being. But don't try to force anything. Forcing anything is just like violence to the physicality, and it will just create a distraction. Trying to hold something, right? There's such a naturalness and a simpleness to just simply being. It's the ultimate relaxation where everything just flows, right? Speech flows, wisdom flows, grace flows. It's all just flowing from the innermost being. The light of the heart is shining. When you're resting in the being, and the heart is wide and soft, resting in the bliss of being, the simple bliss, just simply being here just as you are. The light of the heart starts to shine on the surface of life. Mm. 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 You're illuminating your own way. Deeper and deeper absorption in the being is what carries you into yourself, into the remembering of divine wholeness. All of the words that describe layers of consciousness, they're only ever referring to the depth of absorption. So there is no ladder to climb. There is no mental knowledge to acquire. All wanting will create obstacle. just to be yourself. Recognize the incredible preciousness of the subtle perception of yourself. Every glimpse, every taste carries you deeper. And if that recognition has opened into an ability to fall into absorption, then there's great beauty in this. And it is to fall in and in and in.